To begin with, we asked people what they felt climate change meant to them as an individual, either at home or in the workplace.
Climate change, to me, I think is quite a concern. It's something that I'm quite worried about because we still don't really know what the effects will be locally and globally. So it is a concern, and at the moment we're not quite sure what the future holds.
As an individual, it obviously affects me in a professional capacity, in that the strategies and plans that we're looking at to deal with flooding in the future, flooding and erosion, we've got to take it into account. And I think as on a personal level, I guess, I've got kids, and like anyone else, you would hope that that people today aren't causing problems for the people of the future.
To me as an individual, I think it means not so much how things may affect me, as those things may be long term, but how actions that I am carrying out today might affect, for example, my children in the future. How it might impact what they can or can't do, or where they can't stay, or how they may travel. All of these things could be influenced by what I do today.
It's easy to say this is not going to affect us in our lifetimes, but if it does have the really hugely damaging impacts on the planet, it's a pretty poor legacy that we can pass on to the next generation. So in that regard, it's something that to me, we really need to get sorted.
But what do people need to know about climate change? Clearly, presenting facts rather than scaremongering is much more important if we want to convince people that climate change is important and adaptation to climate change is important in the long term.
I think people should know and realise that climate change is happening. Some people still refuse to believe that this is happening, but the scientific evidence does show that the planet's temperature is increasing.
I think in terms of climate change, people should know that it's happening. I think most people probably do have an appreciation that it's happening, but also the fact that they, in their individual lives, have a contribution to make to combating climate change. So from their daily, the way they go about their daily lives in terms of reducing the energy they use, trying to find alternative forms of transport than their own car, that would be helpful.
I think the most important things they should know is, first of all, what the idea is as to what's contributing it to, what the natural contributions are, and what the man-made contributions are, so that they can understand that side of things.
People need to know that there may well be sea level rises, there may well be bigger issues as a result of flooding. In particular, increased rainfall predicted in some of the winter periods in the north of Scotland.
The things which I feel people should know about climate change are probably two things. First of all, how it would affect their lives directly, but also how it's going to affect other people, so that they're aware that their actions can have consequences elsewhere in the world.
There is a big amount of information out there in terms of climate change that people have at their fingertips. It's just translating that from the high level to the individual person's level.
Potential impacts of climate change only become relevant to individuals and communities when individuals can actually see it for themselves.
We will see more flooding, in particular in relation to river plains, floodplains, streams. The sea level rise doesn't look as if it's going to be tremendously high around the coast here, so we don't expect there to be huge problems with sea level rise, but we will have to be prepared for continued erosion, as we've had for many years in Aberdeen, and we see that in the groins down in the beach. We've had sea erosion in that area, and that will continue.
We have to look at the risk of flooding, and we're looking at increases in the amount and intensity of rainfall, which can obviously lead to flooding. This can affect both the rivers, but also, very importantly, I think urban drainage systems in the towns and cities will be put under a lot of stress. And likewise at the coastline, I think if we do even see a relatively small amount of sea level rise, then that's got to have some impact on those communities that are already vulnerable to coastal flooding.
It's maybe perhaps still not fully understood what effect climate change might have on Aberdeen. Lots of different models predict different temperatures or different amounts of rainfall. If we continue to see changes in rainfall that we've seen at Forvey in recent years and having wetter winters, which has led to flooding here in the nature reserve, then that could be a problem, I think, in future for some of the large rivers in Aberdeenshire that might be more prone to flooding.
Aberdeen has already spent a considerable amount of money on its coastal defences. If sea levels continue to rise and through our more uncertain climate we experience more storms, that's something again that we may have to be spending more money on protecting our coastline. Sea level rise will have an effect on tides within Aberdeen Harbour, so maybe we'll have flooding within the local area of the harbour itself. So these are just a few of the things that may impact on Aberdeen through climate change.
Adaptation sounds quite simple, but it's complicated by uncertainty. What are we adapting to? Why, when, and how?
So it's about us looking at the reality of climate change and the reality of what that means for us in a day-by-day basis, and looking at how we can take care of those issues and plan for those issues so they don't have an impact on our communities.
I think there are situations where, as in behind me, you have the town of Stonehaven, which obviously is a lot of property which is a flood risk, both from the rivers and from the sea. And I think in those cases adaptation is maybe limited in terms of moving assets away from the area at risk. But what we can do is make sure that buildings are more resilient to flooding, so that recovery process is much faster, and that people are more aware of what the risks are and what they can do to reduce the impact on themselves.
We've now realised that we can't defeat climate change, that it's happening and it's potentially going to get a lot worse, so we're now having to really firefight to deal with the consequences of this. So I would almost describe it as a sensible but defeatist term.
Flooding is something we're becoming increasingly aware of in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, whether it originates with rivers or the sea or from a combination of both.
In terms of mitigation of flooding risks in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, the principle has been to really look at our development plan, both in the city and the Shire, starting from the structure plan and looking at the development plans. And the Aberdeen City Development Plan that's recently been approved does accommodate the whole issue of climate change. So we are looking at where will we build in the future, and we are clearly staying away from floodplains and steering away from that potential of damage to households in the future by not building.
In terms of Aberdeen City, the action that's been taken to mitigate against flood risk is largely in the preparatory stage, looking at which areas are prone to flooding, which areas might increase in terms of flooding. So it's establishing where the need for intervention is. There has been some small-scale anti-flooding initiatives in certain parts of the area, but they're largely localised in nature, not affecting a huge deal of the population. One of the other things that's really important is raising public awareness of flood risks and what people can do to help themselves to minimise the effect of flooding that has on their property and on their lives.
Flooding is having a costly impact on people's homes and livelihoods. If it is attributable to climate change, as we're so often told, what evidence is there that we're trying to make the right changes in order to minimise the impacts on local communities?
Effectively, adapt sensitively. So make sure that we're still leaving this coastal strip there for wildlife, for effectively reducing the amount of hard engineering that needs to go on, and quite frankly saving money.
I think in some ways trying to make space for the coastline to act in the way it wants to and respond naturally, because the coastline will respond to climate change and sea level rise. It has done in the past and it has the capacity to do so. The issue is that people have got in the way of that, and I think strong planning to make sure that those areas of coastline which are needed to adapt to rising sea levels, that they're left protected from development.
Many different ways have been used to try to communicate the impacts of climate change to local communities. These include news items, fact sheets, video clips, and even the internet. But which of these is the most effective and informative when it comes to trying to convince people of the need to adapt to climate change?
Well, here at the Nature Reserve, we do consider it one of our important roles is to try and educate people to understand what they can do to help reduce climate change and the effects it might be having in Aberdeenshire. So we have lots of school groups that come in and they're learning about climate change now in school, as well as adult parties who can come in and pick up information and talk to us about the measures that we've put in place at Forvey.
Well, I think the most effective tool is to let people see what can happen. And I think when people see the potential of what can happen by looking at places perhaps they have seen themselves on their holidays or on television in other parts of the UK, that visual experience is very, very real. It's the next best to the real thing, but you don't want people to experience the real thing.
As they say, pennies add up to pounds. So if I recycle 1 tin can, if the UK do that, that's 60 million tin cans, and the energy involved obviously for recycling materials such as this will have an effect if we add this up together.
Clearly, this video only presents a brief insight into what people think and know about climate change and its impact upon coastal communities. Being prepared for climate change is vital. Changing the way we behave, the way we travel, our lives and how we work is becoming essential. And understanding why we need to adapt to climate change is becoming crucial. If we are to adjust to an ever-changing and unpredictable climate, then we must adapt to climate change now.